May of 1980, The Empire Strikes Back hit theaters. It was a bold sequel that took the story in new directions and is today widely considered the best movie in the franchise. George Lucas continued to push the boundaries on visual effects, incorporating both practical and digital techniques. The movie also introduced franchise favorites like Boba Fett and Yoda, while giving us more of the characters that made the first movie so memorable. The movie was everything it needed to be and more. Since then, the film has been examined, critiqued, revered, adapted, and reimagined countless times. However, one curious example stands as fairly unique. Ian Doesher's William Shakespeare's Star Wars: The Empire Striketh Back. In this creative take on the story, many people's favorite Star Wars movie is reimagined as a Shakespearean play. The book, like the movie it's based on, is the second in the series and builds on the techniques used in the original, improving them. Although formatted as one, Ian admits that when he wrote the first book, it wasn't intended to be a real play. In the first book, Ian overuses the chorus and is less considering of the logistics of a stage show. By the sequel, Ian started to be more creative with his solutions for how to portray action scenes. These books are comical and can be considered parody, but Ian Doesher loves Star Wars and is also committed to a faithful adaptation. The books also had to be approved by Lucasfilms. For this reason, this version is less of a farcical take on the story and more just another medium that the story could be adapted to. The author himself views Star Wars and Shakespeare as a very natural combination.
Those are two things that have been dear to my heart since I was young. Star Wars really from before I have memories, and Shakespeare since I was a freshman in high school. And so um, they are two things that that I have adored and have wanted to be, a continuing part of my life. And I think they go together well because, Shakespeare wrote the sort of popular entertainment of his day that I think is what Star Wars is for us now. I think if Shakespeare were alive now, he would be writing things like Star Wars. Shakespeare wrote about, you know, human emotions and stories with good characters where people were having adventures and learning to live with their fates and experiencing all kinds of new things. And that's what all good stories are, and that's certainly what Star Wars is as well.
When writing these books, Ian Doesher sets himself a few basic rules. The first rule is that, unless following a new rule, all characters speak in iambic pentameter. This means that their lines break down into 5 two-beat phrases. But hold, one mo, min some, thing seems awry. Ian holds to this format stricter than even Shakespeare does, in order to ensure that he doesn't seem, by his own words, lazy. He also ends scenes with rhyming couplets whenever possible.
He orders what he will, sans sense or rhyme. This deal is worse becoming all the time.
Ian Dosher's creativity allows him to play with the side characters in this story and make them just as, if not more memorable than their original counterparts. Specifically, the characters of R2-D2, Boba Fett, and Lando Calrissian are all given more complete characterizations in the book. In addition, C-3PO and Yoda are also expertly adapted, resulting in a book that couldn't exist without the original, but does a better job overall of fleshing out the side characters. Part 1: C-3PO. C-3PO is a comic relief and foil. And that's not a joke about how shiny he is. He was originally inspired by Maria from Metropolis, or at least to be a male version, but it was actor Anthony Daniels who decided his personality would be more like a nervous butler. C-3PO is the butt of a lot of jokes. He's also contrasted well by his partner, most of the time, R2-D2. We'll talk more about him shortly, but for now we can see how these two play off each other.
C-3PO and R2-D2 give us a little bit of classic bumbling comedy shtick. There's always the stalwart hero, and then there's the guy next to him going, do we have to go in the dark place?
I'm not getting in bed. I'm going to regret this.
3PO is always complaining or panicking. His first lines in the movie are him bickering with R2 about whose fault some minor mishap is. He is overdramatic, and the other characters find him annoying, even when he's being useful. Despite this, he still cares for R2, but we'll go back to complaining in a heartbeat. He's got the reluctant sidekick thing right down to a T. In Ian Dosher's version, 3PO is all of this on steroids. Shakespeare was no stranger to writing characters who are long-winded and kind of pompous, despite being sincere. And so our gold droid feels very naturally suited to this version. 3PO is supposed to be an expert in human behavior. He frequently reminds us how many languages he speaks, but he is constantly misunderstanding the humans around him. He jumps to extreme conclusions and then is immediately proven wrong. Take this moment where the gang is escaping the rebel base on Hoth, and the door closes just a bit early, leaving 3PO briefly trapped.
But wait! Where do you go? Pray do come back! Most typical this is. No wretched fate! To be deserted by my friends most dear. These human beings care but little for us droids, who ever serve with loyalty. Thus shall I end my days within this base. Oh, open up your hearts unto my kind. Then open wide this door for kindness' sake.
The door opens.
3PO right away jumps to a nightmare of him being discovered years later, a frozen remnant of the rebels' stay, only to be rescued seconds later. This speech of his is an excellent example of using the medium of a Shakespeare play to show us 3PO's personality. And all of this is just a page after his heartfelt farewell to R2. This reinforces 3PO as kind of emotional for a droid. He's a worrywart, a stick in the mud.
It's prissy.
Thank you, Red Letter Media. Overall, this adaptation is excellent. It makes full use of the character and the format. 3PO feels like a pompous, annoying, but very dear friend. Part 2. R2-D2. The other side of the comic relief coin, in almost every way, is R2-D2. Visually, the two are quite different, with R2 being far less humanoid. His lack of voice, beyond beeps, means that he often relies on other characters' dialogue to clue us in into what he actually said. Much like characters do with Chewie, the person R2 is speaking with usually lets us know roughly what he said. This contrasts with what we were saying about C-3PO earlier. R2 is brave and resourceful, and never annoying to any of the characters. Even when he fails, it's usually not his fault. Near the end of the movie, he even fails because 3PO told him to plug into a power socket by mistake. He's seen as loyal and hardworking. Ian Doesher takes the frankly inspired approach of giving R2 lines, spoken only to us, the audience. These are called asides. They allow a character to speak their thoughts to us without other characters hearing, and are actually fairly commonplace in many plays, including Shakespeare. Ian takes inspiration from the classic idea of a Shakespearean fool, a commoner who uses their wits to outdo a high-class character. R2's jests are often at the expense of C-3PO, who is an easy stand-in for upper-class foils. Through asides like these, we get greater insight into R2's emotional state and his motivations. He tells us that 3PO is like an annoying sibling in their first scene together.
Watch thy tongue, thou naughty droid, or I shall bring my wit to bear on thee, and thou shalt not escape my shocks and jabs. For though I speak aloud in beeps and squeaks, within my mind a keener tongue prevails. And though thou like a brother art to me, I'll happily correct your errant ways.
His lines also show us his feelings toward Luke and the rebellion at large. He's not just a useful and loyal droid, but a true friend who knows that he has his own part to play.
I would that I, my master, could protect, but such is not the role I have to play. And thus, since I may not protector be, my path shall be to play the fool and watch. I shall maintain my droid-like silence and bear witness as the boy becomes the man. The learner doth become the Jedi true. Content yourself with this, R2, and rest. For other times than these require your best.
Overall, we get a more complete version of R2 in this book. We understand his feelings toward his friends more, and his role as a fool feels very fitting for a character who has always punched above his weight class, in Star Wars fans' eyes at least. Part 3. Yoda. Yoda is now ubiquitous with the Star Wars franchise. The wise old master who is powerful with the Force and deadly with the lightsaber. But when Empire Strikes Back first came out, the idea that a small green puppet would be the Jedi Master Luke sought was a massive subversion of expectations. And this was part of George's desire to defy the idea of what the wise master would be like. Most fans agree that there is a powerful thematic element to his character.
You see, Yoda was so magical and interesting because you didn't expect this little tiny creature to be a Jedi Master.
Jedi Master?
We all had a preconception that a great warrior would be someone physically strong and intimidating.
I'm looking for a great warrior.
By making Yoda a little guy, they were illustrating that the Force is something beyond the physical.
The practical effects are particularly effective here. The fact that Yoda is a physical thing on camera adds a sense of grounded reality to him. In The Empire Striketh Back, Ian Doesher decides to have Yoda break from iambic pentameter in favor of haikus. His reasoning is that Yoda, being the wise master with something of an Eastern sensibility to him, is like a sensei, so he opts to have Yoda speak in haiku, a traditional Japanese form of poetry that follows the format 5 syllables, then 7 syllables, then 5. Now, normally, haikus aren't written in complete sentences, and Shakespeare certainly never used them, but it is a fun idea and has some thematic justification. Yoda is another character who feels very at home in a Shakespeare play. With his strange way of talking and ability to be both humorous and wise, Ian uses Yoda to deliver some foreshadowing about the twist from this movie.
I hope thou shalt know. When faced with terror, and with thy father's grim fate, I hope thou shalt know.
This is an excellent choice, as it subtly reinforces the idea that he has wisdom Luke does not. In this version, Yoda reveals a bit more to us about the nature of the cave, namely that it exists as a kind of balance to the goodness here.
With the Force's dark side, is that place yonder quite strong, a place of evil. Discover thou shalt, that wherever good is found, evil is nearby.
Overall, despite being a faithful adaptation and having a clever linguistic trait applied to him, Yoda, along with C-3PO, are the only minor characters examined in this work that don't feel more complete. Partially, this is a result of the popularity of the character himself. Ian even considered just leaving Yoda's lines verbatim from the film. This is also a result of the lack of visual. Yoda's appearance as a puppet creature signals to our brains that he is less physically capable, and thus increases the surprise value of him being a Jedi Master. Part 4. Boba Fett. Boba Fett was technically introduced in an animated segment first shown as part of the holiday special. But since George Lucas himself seems to wish that actually never saw the light of day, for our purposes, we'll pretend that this is his introduction. Although not mentioned by name, Han alludes to Boba early in the movie, telling Leia that the reason he has to go back to Jabba and pay off his debts is a bounty hunter on Ord Mantell. When we do meet Boba, it's with a group of bounty hunters being hired by the Empire. Admiral Piet expresses disgust that they are hiring scum. This sets up the bounty hunters, and thus Boba, as something more dangerous than the Empire, or perhaps capable of more. Other than his cool armor, which is not to be understated, the first bit of specific characterization we get about Boba is Darth Vader saying to him,
"No disintegrations."
As you wish.
He comes across as stoic, tough, and unfeeling. He's definitely in it for the money. In Ian's version, Boba Fett is another character who breaks the iambic pentameter rule. Boba speaks in prose, which is a fancy way of saying he just kind of talks. Shakespeare used prose to establish that a character is lower class than other characters. This is consistent with the disgust that the Imperial officers feel and express at working with the bounty hunters. Like most characters in this adaptation, Ian gives us more insight into Boba's mind through asides and speeches to the audience. His first line is such a speech. This sets up that Boba isn't someone who's talkative or works well with others. The speech itself confirms that Solo is nothing to him, and that he's interested only in the money. After all, Fett doth worship at sweet compensation's throne. Despite his base status as a bounty hunter, Boba proves to be clever and good at his job. When Han does his trick to escape from the Imperial ships, Boba Fett's speech tells us not only has Boba seen him, but his clever wordplay confirms that he is smart enough to have figured out this trick.
A smuggler's ways are e'er unchanging and predictable. Thou hast let the Millennium Falcon go out with the refuse, Solo. But I refuse to let thee play a jade's trick and go thy merry way.
That same speech also foreshadows Han's fate at the end of this play. This, as we've said, is a sign that this character has wisdom or knowledge that other characters don't expect them to.
To the last I'll grapple with thee, and in the heart of Bespin make thee cold with fright. The Fett doth promise it, and it shall be.
In this version, he's also proud and kind of arrogant. He proclaims his victory over Han as he is triumphant in his final line in this play.
Who now hath been victorious, Solo? Who is the winner clear? And as the victor, so go the spoils. Jabba's bounty and his great pleasure shall I enjoy when I arrive with thee on Tatooine. I shall become a courtier in the Palace of the Hutts ere this is through. Boba Fett triumphant.
Ultimately, Boba Fett in the original is a cool set of armor with a tough personality attached. It's simple and effective, but leaves a bit to be filled in by the audience as to what he really might want or be doing this for. Fett's aside to us make it clear he has no real personal grief with Solo, and in fact doesn't even know why there's a bounty on him. But there's a double prize to be won by working for both the Empire and the Hutts. Part 5. Lando. Billy Dean Williams originally brought the character of Lando Calrissian to life, and he did so with a charm and charisma that really elevated what could have been a despised character. Lando, like many characters, is mentioned before we see him. Han calls him a scoundrel, but he seems to mean it affectionately. We're told he has no love for the Empire, and Han even suggests that he probably conned someone out of the colony he's governing. When the gang lands on Bespin, there is some light tension. Han, at first, tells Chewie to keep an eye out, and Lando pretends to be angry with Han over their unspecified past. But after, there is little indication of Lando's upcoming betrayal. The only character that seems on edge around Lando is Leia. This makes sense as he's pretty forward with her, but also serves to keep us on edge. Her fears prove well-founded as Lando leads them into Vader's clutches, and while Lando apologizes and tells them he had no choice, he does seem like he believes he has done what was needed to keep his city safe. Lando's regret seems to come after Vader keeps altering the deal. Like, as he learns the Empire can't be trusted, he decides to save our heroes. In The Empire Striketh Back, Ian Doesher makes a conscious effort to flesh out Lando's motivations. He says so plainly in the afterword. In his opinion, we never get much insight into why he's changing his mind when he did. In Han's first mention of Lando, he says, "The man doth deal in cards and gambling." This sets up a rhetorical theme Doescher is using with Lando. Han's final line in that scene, where he lays bare his hopes and admits to himself it's a gamble to trust this man he hasn't seen since youth.
I here take all I have, my ship, my mates, my one true love, and stake it all on thee and on our past. How shalt thou answer, O Calrissian? Will this my wager prove a foolish bet? How shall the deck unfold, the players end? And is the dealing in my favor stacked? The playing of the game is yet to be, but Lando, I do seek to win with thee.
When we first see Lando, his first line is to us, and it lets us know that he's tricking Han.
Aside.
How shall I play this? Shall I distant be? Nay, then he shall become suspicious, and may have some cause to fear ere Vader comes. I shall be jovial, and shine with joy. A colt is ridden best by kindly rider. I know 'tis true, it worketh every time. Thus to deceive, I shall employ a jest.
This is a change since the film keeps that hidden, but works here not only because of the audience's assumed familiarity with the material, but it adds a level of dread and suspense. It also adds weight to the moment where he tells Han it's good to see him.
Oh, weep my heart, to see him bring such joy, and pains me more to seal his awful fate.
When Vader is torturing Han, Lando is given a speech where he attempts to justify his actions to himself.
Oh, what is this dire sound I just have heard? My friend Han Solo screaming in great pain. The shrieks of man turned victim through my fault. Could I else have done? No person in my place would differently behave. Yet ever shall my soul be haunted by these dismal howls of my old friend, unless I can find some way to make recompense.
By the end of the play, he asks Leia for forgiveness and swears to fly with and serve her. His final speech in the play affirms that he's learned the value of friendship and a cause that one can believe in.
What ties most deep do bind these souls as one? In all my workings as a businessman, in all my making deals and earning more, I have forgotten what doth make life rich. 'Tis friendship, love, and sacrifice that make a life. And I too long have not lived well.
Lando is another character who's given more depth. His asides give us more understanding of the inner conflict he's going through. The original version of the character could have been seen as changing sides without much motivation, and this version makes his journey to heroism more clear to us. Some final thoughts. Throughout this adaptation, Ian Doesher follows a bit of a pattern for the minor characters. In general, characters are given more lines and are often given asides where they speak their minds openly to the audience. This is both an accurate Shakespearean thing to do and an excellent way to expand on the given character's motivations and intentions. It gives characters like R2 a voice where they had none, and offers characters like Lando and Boba a chance to share more of their thoughts with us. Ian uses clever wordplay to show us when a character is quick-witted, and allows them to foreshadow something when they're smarter than others think. While not always trying to improve a character, Ian Doesher is often successful at expanding their motivations. Ultimately, I'm not trying to argue this version is better overall. There is much an adaptation of this nature misses. I mentioned earlier how Ian overused the chorus in his first book to explain action sequences, and I love the creative solutions he found this time to avoid relying on them. But they are no substitute for a well-shot action sequence with George Lucas's groundbreaking special effects. From a character standpoint, we miss seeing how the characters respond to action. Ian does a great job of filling in the information through dialogue, But there's a difference. When we see Boba Fett firing on Luke, it reminds us that he's dangerous. When we see R2 performing under pressure while C-3PO panics, it drives home their personalities without needing to read the character lines. The illustrations in this book are not there to set the scene or establish characters, but are more like flavorful interpretations of iconic moments. Ian Doescher succeeds at what a playwright needs to. The story is conveyed almost entirely through the dialogue. This adaptation stands on the shoulders of George Lucas's groundbreaking films and has the time of its life. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but also respects the stakes and lore of the original. Ian Doescher is at all times striving first to make a faithful adaptation that follows his rules for Shakespeare, and only second to add or expand on the material. In that goal, he succeeds. While the play is not intended to replace the original, it functions as a strong adaptation in large part because of the depth given to all of its cast. Every character with any level of importance to the plot is given time to explain their motivation or thinking, and the result is an entertaining, amusing, and frequently insightful take on many people's favorite in the Star Wars franchise.
Life creates it, makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us and binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter. You must feel the force around you. Here, between you, me, the tree, the rock, everywhere.